The Supreme Court will indeed take up the issue of gay marriage, and this could actually be a good thing for Republicans who still believe this is a cause worth fighting against, but at the same time seem to be fighting the tide of public opinion who, in many cases, really don't seem to care. I'm Ed Berliner. Let's dig into this, taxes, Obamacare, and all things that the president will seek to gain favor with in the State of the Union. This is Midpoint.
Well, the president's a double lame duck president. He is not only in his last 2 years of his administration, but he has divided party government. When you have divided party government, the opposition party controls the leadership, the agenda on the Hill. It's very hard to get anything done.
The president will step to the podium Tuesday night and deliver the State of the Union, which will likely be watched by fewer people than the year before because whether it's the president or some lowly elected individual, they are bored to tears being bombarded by rhetoric. But perhaps, just perhaps, there will be a few things of import here, from gay marriage to a new Republican strategy. Let's welcome to Midpoint the commentary editor for the Washington Examiner and author of Overcoming Obamacare, 3 Approaches to Reversing the Government Takeover of Healthcare, that is now out in paperback. Philip Klein joins us on the show. Philip, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. We will discuss absolutely the Obamacare issue after the break, but for right now, I wanted to get your opinion on what's happening in Washington and what's being said right now. We're a little more than 24 hours away from the State of the Union. The president has been seeding the State of the Union, if you will, across the country for the last couple of weeks. What surprises, if any, does anybody expect him to deal out tomorrow night?
Well, I think the overarching message that he's going to try to send is that he's not irrelevant. Right now, he's in a situation where he's in the 7th year of his presidency. The Republicans now control both chambers of Congress, and you have the media focus starting to shift to the 2016 presidential race, and Hillary Clinton as the standard bearer. So what Obama wants to do in striking this sort of defiant tone on taxes, on Iran, on immigration, and a host of other issues, is to try to say, look at me, I'm still here, I'm still president, you're going to have to deal with me for the next 2 years.
Is part of that, despite the fact that it may pain him at times, that he needs to take on this, if you will, bravado and this blowing up of the chest and getting everybody to realize he's still important because he wants to be sure that that road to Hillary Clinton is still democratically smooth?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear from some of the proposals that came out that he's trying to strike this sort of populist, poll-tested approach where he puts out some policies that will be hard, that intend to make it hard for Republicans to oppose. So he says something such as he's going to support paid leave and paid maternity leave. And it's clear that this is going to lead to the sort of next attack on the war on women that hits home with a Republican constituency of moms and push for more paid leave. Now, what he won't tell you is that when you force companies to offer paid leave, all that happens is that they reduce people's wages. So essentially, mandated paid leave is a mandate that individuals have to accept more of their compensation in the form of paid leave as opposed to cash. A lot of people would prefer the cash.
Is it maybe fair to say that the president and his advisors are looking at Republicans going, you know something, you guys can't get it right. You haven't gotten it right for 6 years. You keep saying you're going to come up with things. You're not going to do it. So guess what? I'm going to put you back in a corner. I'm going to do everything I can right here, but I'm going to make you look bad because I'm convinced you can't come up with anything. So this is my dare to you. It almost is that throwing down of the gauntlet. Is that fair?
I think that it's pretty clear that the other issue that, as I said, Obama wants to portray himself as sort of combative and still relevant. He also wants to try to claim the moral high ground and suggest that ultimately it's Republicans that are going to obstruct all of his great ideas. But then you have something like the Keystone Pipeline, which is something that clearly is going to create jobs that even his own administration hasn't been able to find any bad environmental impact from. And yet he's threatened to veto it because of the radical environmentalists that dominate one wing of his party and that help finance a lot of campaigns.
Philip, I got about a minute left here before we take a break, come back and talk about Obamacare. This came from the New York Times on Sunday, and the headline was Gay Marriage Case Offers GOP Political Cover, where they're saying basically it could deliver a decision that Republicans can say, okay, look, it's been settled, let's move on. Do you go along with that thinking?
I don't think that that's going to happen. If that were true, then the abortion issue would have been settled after they ruled on Roe v. Wade. Party leaders and national Republicans would love to move on for the issue because it doesn't poll well, and most, particularly younger voters, feel as if they don't really see what the big deal is if two guys want to get married.
There you go. It'll be interesting to see what happens, what the president says, and then also what the Republicans counter back with. Hold on just a couple of minutes here, Philip. When we come back, we're going to get into taxes, Obamacare, and those who will tell you without smirk nor shudder how the act is working. They say that Obamacare is working. However, there will be some caveats around the word working. We'll talk about that and much more. Welcome back to Midpoint. Commentary editor for the Washington Examiner and author of the book now out in paperback, Overcoming Obamacare: 3 Approaches to Reversing the Government Takeover of Healthcare. Mentioned in paperback. Philip Klein joins us once again. Philip, let's talk about Obamacare here for a couple of minutes, because it's interesting how no matter how often the numbers come out or whatever it comes out, or whatever the discourse is, people who support Obamacare will tell us that it is working, quote unquote working. They point out that the uninsured fell to 12.9% in the fourth quarter, down from 16.3% before the ACA passed. What aren't they telling us when they say that Obamacare is quote unquote working?
Well, what's happening is that they're focusing on a narrow metric to define success, right? So by focusing on how many people gain coverage doesn't tell us much, because the law mandates that people purchase coverage, and then it spends $1.8 trillion in subsidies to help people get insured. So yeah, of course, if you do that, I mean, it would be pretty wacky if there weren't any movement in coverage. But what's happened is that coverage has gotten much more expensive because they put on so many regulations on insurance that it naturally drives up the cost of premiums, especially for those who don't qualify for any of these government subsidies. And in other cases, what's happened is that because insurers have been forced to offer all these extra benefits and meet all these extra regulatory hurdles, how they've responded in cases where they have an increased cost is they've reduced the number of doctors and hospitals that are offered in their plans. So you may have something that on the surface looks like a health insurance plan, but then when you try to use it, you find out that most of your favorite doctors or hospitals aren't covered.
Well, let me cover on what you're talking about. Let me stop you right there for a second, because when you're talking about doctors, I want to make sure a couple of minutes we have that we get this in. Is it fair to say that one of the bigger dodges of those who are saying that Obamacare is working is the fact that when they talk about the insured, a lot of the insured are actually being moved over to Medicaid, and a lot of doctors simply don't get paid much in Medicaid, so doctors are taking that off their treatment program as well. Isn't that a bigger part of this whole shell game?
Yeah, that's a big issue. And there was a study that came out recently that found that basically, even among the doctors who were listed as accepting Medicaid, you couldn't really get appointments with half of them. Either the addresses were wrong, they said they weren't accepting new patients, they were no longer accepting Medicaid. So even among those who ostensibly accept Medicaid, they don't really accept Medicaid.
All right. Now, you wrote this article on Sunday. It was titled GOP Needs to Find Alternative to Obamacare. All right, Philip, here we go. This is the one thing that every time there's any discussion about the ACA, it comes down to this. The Republicans need to find the alternative. Can they? Have they? Are they any closer to coming out with one right now where they'll be able to put on the table and tell the American people this is the right thing, not what we currently have?
Into three different schools of thought so that readers can go pick up a copy of the book, which you get as cheap as $2.99 on electronic format, and they could decide. It's sort of like a choose your own healthcare adventure. They could decide what type of healthcare system they want and how they want to get there, and decide which approach makes the most sense to them. And once they sort of rally around one of those approaches, I think that shifts the center of gravity politically, and it forces Republicans to want to adopt one of those approaches. Because I think one of the problems that we face is that a lot of people outside of Washington are cut out of the daily policy debate that goes on. And people throw around a lot of these healthcare jargon words, and they're just talking to each other.
Well, let me do this.
So
I only got
wanted
about
to
20 seconds.
translate that.
I only got about 20 seconds left here. Is there a plan that they are willing to get behind, and why can't they get their act together?
They can't get their act together because up until this point, there were a lot of divisions on how to go about it, and so they've had difficulty rallying around a single one, and it's been easier to unify over just opposing Obamacare. But as I point out, there are ways that there are paths for them to consider, and that's why I hope that this book will help generate, spur this conversation that leads to a consensus.
They better do something fast. All right, the book again is called Overcoming Obamacare, 3 Approaches to Reversing the Government Takeover of Healthcare. Philip Klein is the author. He joins us here. Philip, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Short pause. We're back with a man who has the experience and may even have the answer in how to make Congress work. What a shock.